Why are there 885 giant skeleton reports made by 1,196 people, representing over 3,000 giant skeletons found across North America? Why did all these ship commanders, spanning over 400 years, report eyewitness accounts of giants all over Latin America? And why did they put giants on so many maps of their era? Why do all these Native American tribes report giants and their histories? Was Goliath just a big one off freak of nature? Or did God's people battle giant tribes for centuries after the flood? Why are there hundreds of thousands of mounds and earthworks built by the mysterious mound builders in America? And why do so many of them line up with the sun, moon, and stars? Why were they so obsessed with sky worship? And is there a connection with this obsession and God's prohibition of such practices in the Bible? How did they build these structures thousands of years ago using advanced geometry and math? Were some of these mound builders connected to the Nephilim described in the Bible? Stay with us till the end, and you'll see how the Bible can help answer these questions. The internet is soaked with giant content. Because so many are fakes and exaggerations, many people just entirely dismiss the giant phenomenon. But don't be fooled. Giants are part of real history, even though the mainstream doesn't say much about it and even denies giants in some cases. While there are over 20 Bible passages dealing with giants, Genesis 6 verse 4 holds the key. There were giants, literally Nephilim, on the earth in those days, and also afterward when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. This passage lays it out clearly. Angels mated with human women, and their offspring were called the Nephilim. Jude and 2 Peter state that God punished these angels for breaking their domain and violating humanity in this way. And the angels who did not keep their own domain but left their own abode, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. And for if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell, literally Tartarus, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly. The Nephilim that appeared after the flood were likely from a re-incursion. Genesis 6:4 says, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days before the flood, and also afterward, after the flood, when," or in some translations, say whenever the sons of God mated with the daughters of men. Because angels aren't geographically limited, this re-incursion could have happened in biblical lands producing Goliath, King Og, Anak, and others, as well as giants in the Americas. Goliath was a Nephilim descendant called Goliath from Gath. Gath was an ancient stronghold of the Anakim, a group of people named after Anak, whom the Bible identifies as a Nephilim. Joshua wiped out the Anakim in Joshua 11. Caleb drove out the Anakim from Hebron, a city that was formerly called Kiriath Arba, named after Arba, who was the greatest man among the Anakim. David and his warriors killed 4 other giants who lived in Gath, and the Bible records they used massive weapons like Goliath, the 9-foot giant whose armor alone weighed 125 pounds. A farmer plowing his field in 1962 discovered an ancient cache of 35 tools and weapons, including this 26-inch spearhead that weighs 4.5 pounds. Goliath's spear weighed over 16 pounds and had a shaft like a weaver's beam. Even tall, strong people have a hard time using a spear of this size effectively. These weapons were found just miles from where David fought Goliath, also close to the capital city of King Og, the giant who had a bed that was 14 feet long by 6 feet wide. This battle-scarred spearhead even dates to the time of the Bible's giant wars. And guess what? Giant weapons and tools like this are also found across America. Here's a pair of copper axe heads found in the Hopewell Mounds that weigh 38 and 27 pounds. Even the Smithsonian admits that only a giant could have wielded the 15-pound axe head they uncovered. There are more of these findings. Check out this 27-pound grinding pestle found just outside Lovelock Cave, an area saturated with Native American giant history. Dr. Hattery, curator of anthropology at the Nevada State Museum, admits it was possibly used by the red hair giants of the local Native American legends.
It is much larger than we usually find, and this was particularly important and unusual in that its size, but it was also found below the Lovelock Cave and well within the Cytica territory. So this could have been one of the pestles used by the red-headed giants, and might account for its large size because of the large people that
We're using it, yeah.
are using it. Who knows?
Did you know that the Bible is full of battles against giant tribes? Genesis 14 describes 4 kings of Israel who warred against tribes led by Nephilim kings. Deuteronomy 2 says the Emim lived there previously, a people as great, numerous, and tall as the Anakim. Like the Anakim, they too are regarded as Rephaim, but the Moabites called them Epim. Notice this group is assigned a dual affiliation. They were Emim by tribal affiliation, but they were regarded as Rephaim, the giants. Moses, Joshua, and David all fought against these giant tribes. They must have been formidable because in some cases, God even wiped them out himself. Moses believed these giants were real, affirming the testimony of the 12 spies who reported seeing men of great size who lived in a land that devours its inhabitants, likely referring to cannibalism, and also said they saw the Nephilim, reporting they were like grasshoppers in their own side and in their side. Moses validates their report by stating, "Hear, O Israel, you are to cross over the Jordan today and go into dispossessed nations greater and mightier than yourself, cities great and fortified up to heaven, a people great and tall, the descendants of the Anakim, whom you know and of whom you heard it said, who can stand before the descendants of Anak?" Moses even names 3 of the descendants of Anak. The report of the 12th was not some made-up giant fiction. Moses wrote inspired scripture affirming these giants. Josephus, leading historian of the 1st century, says these giants were surprising to the sight and terrible to the hearing. Captain John Smith, who encountered 60 giants, said their voices seemed like they were coming from out of a vault or cave as an echo. Magellan's ship log from the 1520 says that the tallest of their group only came up to the waist of the giants, and that some had a voice like a bull and a terribly strong and loud voice. How could they know what their voices were like if they did not walk among them? Early church fathers and historians like Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, St. Ambrose, Clement of Rome, and Tatian also report the Nephilim were the offspring of angel-human relationships. Ancient extra-biblical texts like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Giants, the Book of Jubilees, the Book of Sirach, and even the Chronicle of the Ancient Britons all chime in with the same consistent story about the giants, the Nephilim. Okay, giants lived in biblical lands, but what about the Americas? We scoured through centuries of newspaper databases, Smithsonian reports, and other sources to build a database of giant skeletons in America. The result? We found 885 giant skeleton discoveries made by at least 1,196 people, representing at least 3,000 giant skeletons. The 1,196 people reporting these findings represent dozens of leading institutions of the day. Did all these people join in some coordinated giant conspiracy that spanned over 200 years? If so, for what motive? They were farmers, explorers, archaeologists, and government officials. As such, no single industry stood to gain from conspiring. People separated by tens or even hundreds of thousands of years with various backgrounds in multiple states report these massive skeletons. There's no conspiracy here. Something was definitely going on in North America, something with a biblical explanation. Let's look at just some of these discoveries. In 1913, an 8-foot skeleton was discovered on Catalina Island, California. Just a few years later, a 9-foot 2-inch skeleton, along with several 7-footers, are also discovered. The discovery of 64 children were also found buried here in 4 tiers, along with a burial urn and a 7-foot 8-inch tall male skeleton. L.A. Marzulli found this photo of an 8 to 9-foot giant in museum archives, including some with 6 fingers, similar to the Bible's account of a giant with 6 fingers and 6 toes. Not far from Catalina on Santa Rosa Island, 7-foot skeletons were also uncovered. A 7-foot 2-inch skeleton was unearthed from Crescent Mound in West Virginia. An 8-foot skeleton was discovered in 1933 in Steelville, Missouri, that was publicly displayed, shown here next to a 6-foot man. Like many giant skeletons, this one was shipped to the Smithsonian, never to be heard of again. These massive skulls were found with 10-foot skeletons in 1913 in Beaver Lake, Arkansas. If we just quickly reviewed just 1% of the giant skeleton findings identified in our database, there are many, many more. We could show these all day, state after state, finding after finding. Chris Leslie has even documented giants in every single county in Ohio, all 88 of them. Did you know that even Abraham Lincoln mentioned giants? While gazing upon Niagara Falls in 1848, Lincoln recorded in his journal, "The eyes of that species of extinct giants whose bones fill the mounds of America have gazed on Niagara as ours do now." Note that Lincoln regarded them as species that was extinct. In Lincoln's circle of friends and dignitaries, they knew that what was being uncovered in these mounds was nothing like the present Native Americans. In fact, the Native Americans of Lincoln's day routinely denied building the massive mounds and earthworks. Many even claimed they were built by giants who were already here when they arrived. Ship captains and explorers from all over the world recorded eyewitness accounts of giants in Latin America for over 400 years. It's even difficult to find period maps of these regions that don't have giants on them. Map after map, ship log after ship log, there are dozens of giant reports from all across these lands. Native American histories are full of giants. Dr. Yates describes the Navajo giant legend as a regal race of white giants endowed with mining technology who dominated the West, enslaved lesser tribes, and had strongholds all through the Americas. In 1857, Comanche chief Rolling Thunder said there was a race of 10-foot-tall white men who ruled and built many fortifications in early America, describing them as cunning, brave, and warlike, driving Indians from their homes. The Paiute said the giants were red-haired, white-skinned cannibals that were 10 feet tall called the Sitka, who lived around the Lovelock Cave in Nevada. The Anishinaabe called Wendigos evil man eating giants. The Chickasaw called Lofa, ogre-like monsters whose name meant flare or skinner. The Iroquois called giants the stone giants or stonecoat giants because they were difficult to kill with their arrows. There are even illustrations of what they look like. Native American historian David Cusick records an Oneida Native American woman who had a male child who grew nearly as large as a grown person by age 12, then into a giant as an adult. He would return from hunts with 5 or 6 deer and bears strung on his belt. This giant was known for attacking people who lived along the river, using massive arrows until he was killed by multiple warriors who then sacked his ford on the south bank of the Susquehanna River, a location Cusick even visited himself in 1800. Cusick explains the giant problem in general. Perhaps about 1,250 years before Columbus discovered the America, the 5 tribes became numerous and extended their settlements as the country had been exposed to the invasion of the monsters that the people could not enjoy but a short space of time without being molested. About this time, a powerful tribe of the wilderness called Othniarhi, or the Stonish Giants, overran the country, and the warriors were immediately collected from several towns and a severe combat took place. But the warriors were overpowered, and the people fell at the mercy of the invaders, and the people were threatened with destruction, and the country was brought to subjection for many winters. As the people have been reduced so often they could not increase, the Stonish giants were so ravenous that they devoured the people of almost every town in the country. He reported that they ate raw flesh of the animals and rolled themselves on the sand to toughen their skin against arrows. Captain John Smith described the Susquehannock as giants when he encountered them on his 1608 voyage up to the Chesapeake Bay. Upon this river inhabit a people called Susquehannock. 60 of them came to us with gifts. Such great and well-proportioned men are seldom seen, for they seem like giants to the English and to the other Indians. Their language, it may well be seen their proportions, sounding from them as it were a great voice in a vault or cave as an echo. Their attire is the skins of bears and wolves. Some have cassocks made of bear heads and skins that a man's neck goes through the skin's neck. The half sleeves coming to the elbows were the necks of bears, and the arms through the mouth with paws hanging at their noses. One had the head of a wolf hanging in a chain for a jewel with bows and arrows, and clubs suitable to their greatness and conditions. He had the largest one drawn on this map, which describes them as a giant-like people, and said their chief had 27-inch calves, about twice the size of a typical man, and used arrows that were 45 inches long, Horatio Cushman recorded the history of the Choctaws in his 1899 book. When the Choctaw crossed the Mississippi River with a force of 10,000 warriors, they encountered a race of white giants inhabiting the area that is now Tennessee. Cushman also reports on the 1880 discovery at a burial mound near Plano, Texas, where they discovered human bones of enormous size, the femoral bones being 5 inches longer than the ordinary length, and the jaw bones so large as to slip over the face of a man with ease. Cushman connected these bones with the older occupants of North America called Alaguay or Talagudi, and believed they were the likely builders of what many call the Adena Mounds. The history of the Lenni Lenape people was recorded in 1820 in the Wallam Olam or Red Record, which parallels the story of creation, the fall, the worldwide flood, and the ice age that was caused by it. This account tracks over 90 chiefs as they traveled across the Bering Strait to the Americas. Recent investigation by Harvard-trained geneticist Dr. Nathaniel Johnson confirmed the migratory path taken by the Lenni Lenape people by tracing Y chromosome markers of native tribes across America. The Wallam Olam tells of the snake people, or the Makawini, which means the big men who were evil cannibals that battled their people as they traveled east. Their history records that the giants were buried in the mounds and eventually died out. Is it reasonable to believe that all these Native American tribes independently fabricated the same myth, or did they know about real giants? Just think about the consistent trends: their height, which was typically around 10 feet, dark practices, including human sacrifice, cannibalism, and advanced technology. Clearly, these ancient accounts are overlapping and consistent. But how do we know which of these giants in the Americas had Nephilim connections? Certainly, height alone is not a good indicator of an angel-human hybrid. Let's turn to scripture for some clues. Some of the early mound builder groups in America were obsessed with sun, moon, and star worship, a practice expressly prohibited by God throughout Scripture. Deuteronomy 4 says, "And take heed lest you lift your eyes to heaven, and when you see the sun, the moon, and the stars, all the host of heaven, you feel driven to worship them and serve them." And chapter 17 says that anyone involved in sun, moon, and star worship has been wicked in the sight of the Lord. With God so strongly opposed to such worship, could dark forces be driving humans to do it? Was Satan, the prince of the power of the air, driving people and possibly the Nephilim, their descendants and possibly subjects under their rule, to be obsessed with worshiping idols, serpents, and the sun, moon, and stars? Consider the massive snake effigy found in Ohio, a quarter-mile-long snake with a sacrificial altar found right in the middle of the egg-shaped circle in front of its mouth. Some very dark practices were going on here, especially with blackened stones, ceremonial knives, and headless skeletons discovered nearby. And some ancient Native American tribes also had a darker association with the serpent. It was a symbol that was to be respected and feared. At the famous temple of the feathered serpent in Teotihuacan, Mexico, brutal human sacrifice rituals were performed in the serpent's honor. Could similar bloodthirsty rituals have taken place here in Ohio, our own backyard?
So this is the collections facility.
Okay.
And I've got a couple of objects back here that I think will be particularly significant for understanding Serpent Mound.
In Brad's collection is a relic that he claims will prove conclusively which group was responsible for building the Serpent Mound and erasing the missing coil. This mystical relic was found less than 50 miles from Serpent Mound.
Wow. I am blown away. This is amazing. It looks like a mix between a snake and a fish.
Exactly. Many of these spiritual, mythological beings are mixtures of features drawn from other animals. It's not representing a fish of any kind. It's not representing a snake of any particular kind. It's representing the Lord of the underworld, this great horned serpent being.
You say that the snake represents this underworld. So what could it be?
We know American Indians built shrines to try to draw on the powers of that supernatural being. So I think that's what Serpent Mound is. It's a shrine to the great underworld serpent.
Researcher Doug Van Dorn has done a great job demonstrating that these serpent mounds are actually found all over the world and look incredibly similar. Just look at these massive serpent mounds found in Ontario, Canada, the land of Bashan in Israel, Avebury Hill in England, Seattle, Washington, South Florida, and the big one in Ohio. Did Satan the serpent and his forces inspire people worldwide to make these as worship monuments? Isn't it amazing how the serpent mounds in Ontario, Canada, and Israel line up in exactly the same way to the summer solstice? These two sites look almost exactly the same, yet they are an ocean apart from each other. And this pattern with a snake and a mound in the same place seems to also be replicated in other parts of the world. We'll take a closer look at some of these later. Experts living through the peak of the mound builder excavation era knew exactly what they were doing. In 1936, right at the close of the era where these mounds were being uncovered without restrictions, Henry Chitrone writes the following in his book about the mound builders. Mound builders, what magic in the very word. What an epitome of all that is romantic and mysterious in human experience. Mere mention of the name suffices to conjure visions of a shadowy race dimly viewed across the ages, come from no one knows whence. Gone no one knows whither or when, giants in physical stature and legion in numbers, weird rites and long-lost magic arts, populous cities and impressive temples, haughty priests and human sacrifice. 100 years ago and earlier, they knew what some of these mound builders were up to, just what forces inspired them to do these things. So when it comes to determining what groups might have had some Nephilim connections, yes. One of the first obvious things to consider is whether they were obsessed with the sun, moon, and star worship, especially if it was in connection with ritual sacrifice.
Tim Pocketod is meeting Chris Hedman, a physical anthropologist investigating Mound 72.
The center of the mound is where we start getting some of the sacrificial pits.
Right.
Mound 72 reveals Cahokians share a key ritual practice with the Maya: human sacrifice.
In the very center of Mound 72 is a mass burial containing 53 young women, all killed at the same time, all buried in the same place, all oriented in the same direction.
In Bonampak, the Maya sacrificed prisoners of war. But here in Cahokia, this burial is nearly all women.
The fact that they're all young, they're reproductive age women, is reflective of a focus on fertility. It seems much more tied to cosmologic beliefs, to some sort of religious event.
To Chris and Tim, the burial, women all facing the same direction, suggests a cosmic alignment. And native oral traditions connect women to the moon.
The moon is tied mostly to women in the many native groups in the eastern woodlands. It's also tied to fertility and the earth and agriculture, so possibly then these women are connected or offered in some way to those powers.
The moon has a monthly cycle, but also follows a longer pattern. Every 18 and a half years, it rises at its most northern position, and then 2 weeks later at its most southern. This celestial event last happened in 2006 and won't happen again until 2025. It's called a lunar standstill. Tim calculates the position of the lunar standstill and the direction the bodies are pointing.
They are aligned with a major moonrise that happens once every 19 years or so.
Dozens of these structures across early America were designed using advanced geometry and math to align with the sun, moon, and stars.
Ellipses, squares, octagons, circles, parallel lines. The builders of ancient monumental Newark clearly knew how to lay out huge shapes with great precision. These different figures used common dimensions. The diameter of the observatory circle forms a square inscribed in the octagon. Laid out 6 times, it marks the distance to the great circle, or from the octagon to the square. Parallel lines would connect the corners of the square with those of the octagon, more than a mile away. Another set would connect the main axis points of the 2 large circles. Incredibly, these 2 sets of imaginary parallels point to the minimum and maximum southern moonrises. There are also matched circumferences and areas. With all of these startling relationships, it seems clear that the Newark earthworks are not just a haphazard collection of geometric fragments. Somehow, there's a larger, unifying idea.
We're talking about structures with millions of tons of earth and stone that would have required millions of man-hours to build. Such practices were certainly not common among the Native Americans when Europeans arrived, with many tribes denying building the mounds and stating they were built earlier by the Tall Ones.
This is Chief Joseph Amahura Riverwind and his wife, Dr. Larilyn Riverwind. Chief Joseph and Dr. Larilyn both have extensive knowledge of ancient Native American culture in North America.
There's a deliberate changing of Native American oral tradition. Why? Maybe because it doesn't fit the academic narrative that's being taught in the schools and colleges right now. But we can't change our stories. A perfect example is the Shawnee people. They inhabited Ohio, the state of Ohio, and Ohio has, I think per capita, the largest amount of Indian mounds still based on everywhere else in the United States. Well, the Shawnee used to have control over that land. And a former chief of the Shawnee, Chief Wallace, who also happens to be a professor, she made a very clear statement that the Shawnee did not build those mounds. But yet you go to a state park there and it'll say, the Shawnee Indians built these mounds.
It's quite interesting that these earthworks are strangely similar to Gilgo Rephaim, Hebrew for the Wheel of Giants, in the land of Bashan, where the biblical giants lived. This 520-foot circle was built using 42,000 tons of boulders. Like many of the earthworks in America, the spokes and wheels are synchronized with annual astronomical events requiring remarkable surveying skills and astronomical knowledge. Is it just by coincidence we find the same sky-tracking structures built by the mound builders in North America? Close to the Wheel of Giants, we find a serpent-like ridge 3/4 of a mile long that is covered with over 100 megalithic burials, indicating it was significant even more than hundreds of years before King Og ruled Bashan. This is very similar to the massive snake effigy found in Ohio. So where are these giant human skeletons today? Surely if they've been found all across America, we should find them openly displayed in museums, right? Not actually for some reason, and we think we know why. They are covered up. It's well documented that the Smithsonian recorded at least 17 giant human skeletons, but today they admit to none. We can actually trace the smothering of the giant evidence back to the second half of the 19th century, about the same time Darwin's ideas were catching fire. You see, it's difficult to sell the idea of manifest destiny, the idea that white Americans were ordained to settle North America if there was, in fact, a so-called more advanced civilization that lived before the Native Americans being displaced by European settlers. Darwin's ideas of racial superiority were central to murdering, driving out, and placing the Native Americans on reservations. Sadly, to some, it was somehow easier to displace the Native Americans if they were perceived as less evolved and less sophisticated than some Europeans perceived themselves. This Darwin-fueled backing to the idea of manifest destiny would have been watered down if Europeans knew that a so-called more vast race of tall, possibly even white people, preceded the Indians of their day. The truth about the giants and mound builders and their technology flipped evolution theory on its head. It was backwards to the narrative being pitched by the mainstream. There's also the reality that many of these giant bones were not mineralized and therefore turned to dust after being unearthed, something we found reported in several archaeological reports. There's also the fact that the heyday of digging up mounds for treasure and giants began shutting down over 100 years ago as state, federal, and Native American regulations began clamping down.
We were yearly at Okmulgee National Monument in Macon, Georgia. During the Civil War, they were cutting through the forest for the railroads, and ended up cutting into a funeral mound, ancient Native American funeral mound. And when they did, they found this huge complex. They estimate anywhere from 35 to 40,000 people once lived here. There's a great temple mound, a lesser temple mound, funeral mound, trading areas, village sites, ball grounds. I mean, this was the hub of the Southeast for trading. And when they cut into the mound, of course, it was a funeral mound. They exhumed 3 skeletons from that mound, and they had them on display at Okmulgee. Well, many years ago, and we were at, every year they have an Okmulgee Indian celebration, celebrating the Muskogee people, the Creek people, and the tribes. And one of the very, very respected elders of the Creek Nation had come out. He's passed away now, and we were inside the museum area of Okmulgee. And he was just telling us stories, the Creek stories of that place. And that's when he looked at us and told us about they used to have the skeletons on display, and they were easily 9 to 10 feet long. And he remembers when he was a child, and his parents had brought them out there because it's like a pilgrimage site for the Creek people. And he homecoming. And he remembers seeing them in the glass. And then NAGPRA was put into law, the Native American Grave Repatriation Act. And once that happened, those skeletons disappeared. It was, you can't have those on display. You can't have the bones of our ancestors on displays, which I completely understand. But these are 9-foot tall skeletons. This isn't just our normal human being ancestors.
Yet giant bones are still being discovered. Professor Francis Thackeray displays this massive femur bone during an interview with Michael Tallinger. They estimate the bone was from a human about twice the normal size, or about 12 feet tall. When discussing the same finding, secular paleoanthropologist Dr. Lee Berger admits that they still find a lot of human bones that are large like this one, and admits they are not abnormalities. So let's review. We have Smithsonian records that include 17 giant skeletons pulled from these mounds, each between 7 and 8 feet tall. We found 885 reports representing at least 3,000 giant skeletons from across America of this height or taller. Is it reasonable to presume that 1,196 people reporting these findings, who represent dozens from our leading institutions of the day, were somehow tied together in a massive conspiracy that spanned over 200 years? We have Native American account after account from major tribes across America. We have the Bible and multiple ancient texts that all agree with the giant phenomena. It's also not a coincidence that some of the giant-affiliated mound builders seem dead set on doing exactly what God prohibited, worshiping the sun, moon, and stars. Comparing their ancient earthworks and practices with those of more modern cultures might even hint that they had helped doing this. Perhaps even with fallen angels, bestowing astronomical and mathematical knowledge to engineer their sky-worshipping temples for practicing their rituals. Some have even argued it would be difficult for even thousands of humans to build these structures, hinting that they might have had some celestial help, technological or otherwise. So where does this all take us? We believe there are 2 key takeaways. The Bible is historical, all of it. The creation account, the flood, the giants. These are not myths, they are real history. The second is that when you make an honest comparison between the Bible's history and this clear evidence, one should develop a healthy skepticism about some of the world's version of history, which is ultimately based on a picture that doesn't include or allow God to even start history. Like the Bible says, "And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free."